Hey everybody, welcome back to BarryTsGarage, and we've got another episode with Ask Ed. Hi Ed.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful day.
Wonderful day.
Thank you on behalf of all the viewers. Thank you for taking the time. People often say, thank you Ed for taking the time.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
Keeps me busy.
Yeah, that's right.
I saw somebody the other day, somebody asked me, one of my friends says, you go to the shop every day? I said, yeah, I go to the shop. I usually every day as much as I could.
Yeah.
When I'm at the shop, I'm busy. I have so many projects to do here. It keeps me thinking about stuff that keeps me out of trouble.
That's right.
Yeah. Sometimes you have things you think about, you shouldn't be thinking about that.
You better to have a focus on your thinking.
Focus on minding your own business.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Well, I've been collecting questions again, and I have a batch to start with, and that's on transmissions and fluids. And thank you all for sending, just in your comments, asking questions or something. It gives us something to get going with Ed.
Yeah, good.
So that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. What are the key differences between Ford's Mercon and GM's Dexron transmission fluids, and why does Dexron 3 work well in a 97 Tahoe, for example, but seems to cause rough shifting in an 03 Excursion? That's the Ford 4R700.
I don't know exactly. I'm not up to date on the newer transmissions. And I know, I wish I knew more about this. I go to the transmission shop over here, and he has additive, a little can of additive. He says, this additive is for a 350 Chevy transmission or 400. And this additive here is for something else. And the other one's for a Ford AOD or something. Uh-huh. And this additive is for a Dodge transmission. Different additives for every model of car.
Really?
A whole arrangement. So I don't know what's so picky about that thing. As far as I know, the transmissions are still a transmission that's valves, steel valves, and aluminum valve body.
Right.
And it springs behind them, different lengths of springs. That's why it makes it the time it shifts. The miles per hour, it shifts in the second gear, and the next miles per hour shifts in the other one. As far as we know, the Ford transmission oil is a dry oil.
Okay. So
the Ford transmission didn't shift so well. So they put the dry oil in to make it shift, like a shift kit.
Okay.
And the transmission, the General Motors transmissions shifted so smooth, the old lady liked the smooth shift. So they put slippery oil in it.
Okay.
So GM oil is more of a slippery oil, and Ford oil is a dry oil and more sticky.
Yeah. So somehow it has more grab or friction or something.
So we always put the Ford oil in all our transmissions.
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't think it was just my opinion. I think the B&M shift kit oil was a Ford oil with some blue additive.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I don't know. There's so much additives to these oils that I can't keep track of, and I'm not interested in going to a lab company and talking all about the oils,
right? Motor
oils and stuff.
So
especially transmission oils.
Right. So kind of a little disclaimer. When you're talking about your transmissions, these are all the older hot rodder transmissions.
Yeah, 350, 400, C4, C6s, and things like that.
Yeah.
That we shifted. But it's the same transmission updated.
Yeah.
I mean, now there's 6 speeds and 9 speeds, and I don't know how many speeds they have. It's just one transmission bolted on behind another one. Right. So there's a whole bunch of 2 speeds hooked together. Right. So it makes it an 8-speed, or how many you want to bolt on the back of it, I think. Yeah. But they all put it in one case. And I know that we have a transmission guy down the street here that rents a spot from us. We got a nice garage, 3 or 4 hoists down there. But anyways, I go down and look at his transmissions, and he got the weirdest transmission I ever seen in my whole life.
Really?
On some kind of a Subaru or something. And they're most expensive to fix. Mm-hmm. Like a Chevrolet transmission in a 2015 or something like this, maybe $3,500 to overhaul it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you better throw the torque converter in it.
Yeah.
Because the torque converter has those clutches in them. Mm-hmm. That lockup clutches. That's the 4-speed with the lockup.
Yeah.
And so I know a little bit about that. And again, over all the 700Rs, I do my own transmissions. Mm-hmm. But I go down there and I wouldn't even tear one of those transmissions apart. Yeah. But it goes back to the oil again. I think he uses Ford oil down here when he puts it in. I don't think he has any oil, particularly for the Dodge transmission or the Ford transmission or the GM transmission or the Subaru or something. Yeah. I think he puts all Ford oil in.
Yeah.
In his overhauls, so he fixes them. Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go. If you have a more modern transmission, you might want to do your own research.
Do research.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This is actually not a transmission question, but I'll ask you anyway. It's a little bit different.
Okay, we'll try that.
Have you ever heard of anyone using winter formula, so it's got some kind of antifreeze something in it, washer fluid as a performance enhancer in your engine?
It's alcohol.
Ah.
It's alcohol. Alcohol burns.
Okay.
Yeah, why not put a little alcohol in the gasoline? It burns colder.
Okay.
Yeah, it would burn colder. And so it'd have a little bit more spark than gasoline. Yeah.
So a winter antifreeze washer fluid?
Washer fluid have alcohol in it. Sure, yeah.
Interesting.
And
okay.
And alcohol absorbs water.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it takes all the water. Sometimes we used to have a gasoline additive where we put in our cars in the wintertime with alcohol. We put it in a gas tank.
Yeah.
It took all the water out of the gas, then it wouldn't freeze up the gas lines and break the fuel pump and stuff in cold weather.
Right. I have a feeling people up north watching might know about that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, next question. Do you consider the Turbo Hydromatic 350, is that the greatest transmission, or what would be your favorite? And I guess we'll say for hot rodding.
It's not a very strong transmission.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't put any kind of car that had any kind of horsepower. Of course, you'd go to the Turbo 400.
Mm-hmm.
Turbo 400 is a longer transmission, a bigger one, and a lot heavier.
So it's more.
The shafts are bigger in diameter, and the planetaries are bigger. And you can buy some of the most expensive parts for that Turbo 400. You know, my friends at Hughes Transmission down the street here, I go down there sometimes to look at some of the things they do to the Turbo 400 now. And they would never do that to a 350.
Okay.
Yeah. But their Powerglides are, of course, it looks like a Powerglide maybe, but it's not a Powerglide at all.
Mm-hmm.
The shafts are huge. The torque were the input shafts and the homemade valve bodies in them and stuff, but still a 2-speed transmission.
Okay.
I think that transmission, I'm not guessing, but sometimes that transmission with the big oil pan and that transmission case, the thicker case, it's all approved and things, maybe it's $15,000 for the transmission. But the 350, no. Yeah. I like the 350 for street cars. Yeah. A Camaro like this one, on just a regular 350 motor or 327 is absolutely a good transmission.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it depends on the application, I guess.
Yeah, it depends on the application, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I like the three-speed transmission over the 2-speed.
Yeah.
If you had a Powerglide, I'd take the Powerglide out. It's much more drivable with a 3-speed transmission instead of a 2-speed. Okay,
now let's slide over. How do you compare? Those are General Motors transmissions. Yeah. How do you slide over the C4, C6, AOD?
Well, it's the same way. The C6 is a heavy transmission.
Okay.
I think it takes a lot of horsepower to turn a C6. I think it takes a lot of horsepower just to rotate the thing the way it's made. Mm. The gears and stuff inside of it. The C4, they made 2 C4s. It was small early one. It had a small shaft about the size of a dime.
Really?
The input shaft that went in the torque converter, yeah.
Hmm.
And then the other one, the later one, was the same C4, and it had a bigger input shaft. Okay. And that's what is desirable. Mm-hmm. We put that C4 behind a Flathead Ford in a T-bucket or something, or a Model T car, and makes an awesome runner transmission drivability. Okay. People just like that Flathead with a C4 in it. It's a little skinny transmission, and it fits in the frame. And
so it doesn't take up much space.
Don't take up half the space of a 350 Chevy transmission.
Okay. So it's an application thing again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, application.
Now, what about the different TorqueFlites? I got to bring that in.
TorqueFlites? I don't see how. TorqueFlites are good. I know a lot about them. We used to race them when they were brand new and things like this, drilling the holes in them and making manual shift bell bodies and all kinds of gear ratios in the band. There's a lever on the band. You could get a bigger and a wider band. Okay. And all kinds of drums went in there. That was really a strong transmission. And even in the days for a while then, I was accused of doing a little bit of that. So we didn't care that we could repair them. Yeah. But some of the super stock people for a little while were doing a neutral start. They put the car in neutral.
Okay.
Open the starting line and get ready to rev the motor. And about that time, even the Chrysler people and the not funny cars, but when you mash the throttle a couple times, the last time you mashed it to the floor and yanked it in gear.
Oh, man.
And of course, instantly, there's no stall speed. The motor was on its way up in RPMs, headed for somewhere around 6,000 or something. About the time the transmission engaged, and off it went.
It would hold together.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sometimes they were all over the drag strip. Parts went everywhere. Looked like you broke a watch. But anyways, maybe after a few months or something, they said, "Oh, no more of that. It's against the law. You're out."
Yeah.
So they stopped doing that.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So you don't have a single favorite transmission, sounds like.
I don't have a favorite.
It kind of depends.
Dodges, I always like the 727, of course.
Yeah. What do you think about the GM switch pitch torque converter from the pre-modern era?
They never was in a performance part of it.
Okay.
But I know they had a electric switch in the valve bodies on a Turbo 400 because some Cadillacs had electric wire in them, and it changed the pitch in the torque converter. It actually gave you a lower gear. The torque converter would slip different.
Huh.
And they were in maybe a ambulance or a hearse.
Okay.
Or something like that. They weren't around very long, but they were behind the 500 cubic inch Cadillac motors.
Okay.
Then they had this pitch transmission with the extra wire on it and give them a lower gear and first gear. And it all was in the torque converter. So then if they got in a position with pulling that long trailer or whatever else they wanted to do with it, and then with this switch, they would get it to pull right up on the hill, up on the road, and they could go normally.
Huh. Okay.
It wasn't an overdrive.
Yeah.
It was a lower first gear. If that's what he's talking about.
Okay, so now you mentioned torque converters, and you've told us before about the kind of the trick, you might say, of using a Chevy Monza torque converter was smaller.
It's a smaller diameter.
To get a higher stall speed?
Yes.
Okay, so related to that comment, is it your opinion that the V8 Monza, because they did make a V8 briefly, right? The 305 or something?
Yeah.
Would that be more durable than the one in a Vega? The little four-cylinder Chevy Vega?
It probably was the same. It probably was a 350 converter. If it had a V8 in it, it probably was the same 350 converter. I don't think they put a 10-inch converter behind a V8 just because it was in a Monza or a Vega.
Right.
Or a Monza, or whatever they want to put it in. They would have put, and a 350 transmission, they would have had a regular 350 converter in. I don't have any knowledge on that.
Yeah. But
Just
it makes
because
sense.
it was a Monza, they put a converter, and a V8, they put a smaller converter. I don't think so.
Yeah, it seems to me by just how they would do things, they would keep the transmission matched to the engine. Yeah.
Most important.
Yeah.
Because if you would have a smaller converter and a V8 motor, you wouldn't get very good mileage.
No.
It's going to slip.
Yeah.
You couldn't lock those converters up until they come out lockup.
Yeah.
It's like our race cars, we were racing with the Powerglide. We knew that car slipped about 3 or 4 miles an hour at 130 miles an hour.
Okay.
If we'd been at 4-speed, we'd have went 3 or 4 miles an hour faster. But you can't lock the converter up totally.
Yeah. Okay.
You can't. Impossible. Yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to throw you back to the day, back early 60s when you were a Chrysler mechanic. Okay. And maybe you mentioned, I don't remember for sure, but someone said you mentioned about a push button transmission and rigging it up with a clutch somehow.
Yes. We run that.
Okay, well, this person is saying that's impossible, so you're going to have to explain how did you do that?
Took the torque converter out.
Okay.
And put a regular clutch in it. I should go back here. I have those pieces laying back here. Was a drive that went on in the torque converter. There's a 3-finger drive. Fingers this, and you change the input shaft of the transmission.
Okay.
So it was automatic transmission on one end of the input shaft and a clutch splines on the other, a dry clutch.
Really?
Yes. Then they had this drive thing that run the front pump. There was a sleeve about this long, about that big around, that slid over the transmission little snap ring and a couple of thrust washers.
Okay.
And it ran in the fingers of the clutch disc. Your fingers for your throat bearing.
Yep.
And the throat bearing would run up and down on those fingers just fine.
Okay.
Would run the front pump. So as soon as you started the motor up, the front pump's running.
Okay.
Push the clutch down, it didn't go anywhere. Push the push button in, it didn't go anywhere until you let the clutch out.
Okay.
So that was a clutch automatic transmission. And when you get ready to shift it, you just push the button.
So you still use the buttons?
Yeah, I still use the buttons because if just buttons, it's just shifting the transmission.
That's awesome.
I have some push buttons here in the box too.
Okay.
So even our car was the first one, I think, made an adapter pipe about so big around.
Uh-huh.
It had a nice plate on the top with all the buttons in it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so you mount that on the floor like a floor shift. You didn't have it in the dash.
Yeah.
So you could put that in your column and on your floor shift.
Okay.
Stick it out like a 4-speed shifter, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all worked fine.
Yeah. Okay, so anyone who says it's impossible, if Ed's already done it, it's...
Oh, they did it. And actually, the first one I seen, I talked to you before, was on a Ford.
Really?
Ford transmission. The Clough boys over in the other side, in Chandler over here. I think they're still alive. I think but they had a 40 Willys. I think they had a Ford transmission, early Ford, 3-speed transmission. And the guy put a power steering pump on it and ran hoses into the front pump.
Okay.
And he didn't have that figure, so he didn't need a front pump. So he just started the motor up, the power steering pump, put out a lot of pressure. They'll put out 300 pounds. So he just, at the same pressure goes into the transmission. And so he had I think it was an FMX transmission and stick shift. Done.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's really great. Could the electrically controlled 2-speed torque converter from the GM Hydromatic 4-speed be adapted to a Turbo 400? Have you ever done anything like that?
Electrically control the torque converter lockup?
I guess it's the lockup. That's right. That would
The only thing it is, it's a lockup.
Yeah, right. Can you adapt that to a Turbo 400?
No.
No.
It doesn't have the fixtures in the valve body.
Ah.
It takes the valves in the valve body to make a lockup converter for Turbo 400.
I see.
Yeah, I never know.
Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
You know the answer. That's perfect. Maybe you can break a tie. Someone's heard that the Turbo 400 requires 11 more horsepower to run compared to the Turbo 350.
That's right. Yes, it does.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've done some racing. You might know about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Powerglide takes less.
Okay.
That's why they like the Powerglide.
So if you're racing and you only need the 2 speeds because of other things.
But just now, right now, the Turbo 400 then, I go down to my friends at Hughes, they take first gear out of the transmission.
Oh, yeah.
So it's too low. It's a 245. Most transmissions they're chasing them 245, 145, and 1-to-1.
Yeah.
There's all those 3 transmissions, the C6s and all of them are that same transmission.
Okay.
But the first gear only went 10 feet.
Right.
And some of these cars are double turbo, 900 horsepower.
Right.
So they just use second gear, and second gear is a 145. Powerglide's a 180. You can change the shifters. We have some Powerglides, but gear ratio on first gear with the regular one. But so the Turbo 400 is a 145 in second gear. So now these cars that run for, so they'll go maybe quite a ways in second gear on a Turbo 400 because they take the low gear out, leave it out.
Yeah.
They put a spacer in there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now that will turn a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so confirmed. Here we go. All right, I'm going to switch gears and go to a different category.
Okay.
It's enough about transmissions for now. We have questions about carburetors. And you know, carburetors, you grew up on carburetors. That's all there was when you were starting.
Yeah.
And now it's just kind of a magic science to a lot of people these days that don't work with them. Can adjusting the secondary butterfly tension screw on the Quadrajet prevent early opening during normal driving, delaying it until you're really deep in the throttle or full throttle?
Sure. Or vacuum to pull that secondaries open.
Oh. So it's not just adjusting a screw.
Yeah. It's just adjusting the tension on it. Yeah, screwing the tension.
So you need to make sure you have the vacuum for it. Like
For the engine.
A lot of people have trouble with the Quadrajets, and so they got a bad
There's so
reputation.
many adjustments on a Quadrajet. Again, we go through that a little bit. I have one back here that I cut the Venturi's out of it.
Okay.
And you look at a carburetor, and we're talking about dirt track here, roundy round.
Okay.
And a car that has to say a Dodge car or something, or Oldsmobile, guys got a Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and you have to run a Quadrajet on it to run that class.
So it's the rules, yeah.
It's the rules, yeah. So sometimes we take a saw and a little machine work and cut some of the Venturi's out. The Quadrajet actually has 2 Venturi's in it.
Okay.
And you cut one of them out because it only needs one.
Okay.
And sometimes you can drill a hole over the cavity. It has a teeny hole, like a pinhole over this cavity. And there's a plastic bowl in there, kind of a cup upside down that displaces the fuel.
Okay.
You drill a hole in it and fill that full of fuel. So now the carburetor will hold more fuel itself.
Okay.
Of course, you can turn it upside down and grind the screws off the throttle valve and the throttle shafts. You grind them flat, so it pulls more Venturi.
Okay.
But we like to try to get a bigger Pontiac 425 carburetor or Cadillac 500.
Okay.
Quadrajet and do that to it.
All right.
So there's so many things in Quadrajets, and you can get them to run fantastic.
Okay.
It takes you a while.
Yeah.
To get them to run. Yeah, each one for itself.
You know, you're going to have to do us all a favor, and we're going to have to get them out one of these days. And because you describe things, and if you know what it looks like, you can maybe follow. But when you haven't seen one and you're trying to imagine, it would be good to do that. Plus that crankshaft video. I'm going to hold you to that too. If you want to, please go to edsmithspeed.shop, and there you'll find a few things, some hats, t-shirts, jackets, some things. We've got a little something there for you. Next question is modifying the Quadrajet's air horn by drilling out the plug and adding a threaded access point. Is that a valid way to enrich the timing externally? And I don't know what he's talking about, so I'm just reading the question.
There's a plug in the top of the carburetor, and it has a screw in there that you can raise up the time if the secondaries open.
Okay.
The secondaries has got a little couple metering rods in it.
Okay.
It's got a spring underneath that. When that spring and how tense that spring is on it and how far that metering rod comes up is adjustable. I think that's what he's talking about. If you leave that thing out there and put a plug in there, you should have a plug in it. If you take that off and adjust it while it's running, the height of that metering rods and the jets. That's the same thing back, like say if you had a 100,000 jet and a 50,000 metering rod in it, and the metering rod's tapered.
Okay.
So when that pulls up and goes down to another one, it enriches the carburetor.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus with that, the secondaries opening up at the same time.
So
the secondaries has got a ramp that when the secondaries open, they automatically pulls up the rear ones.
Okay.
And so it's a lot of adjustments on a Quadrajet. If somebody knows how to make them run, they're excellent carburetor.
Okay. Yeah. Now, as long as we're talking about adjusting carburetors, how much can you do when you're just rebuilding or going through a carburetor versus when it's on the engine running? Like how much tuning?
Just idle speed and a little bit of air mixture.
Okay.
The air mixture usually is affects the engine under 800 RPMs.
Okay.
Is the idle screws. Above that, it has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
The idle screws are little screws in this thing that has nothing to do with it. Above 800 RPMs, they're all taking over the rest of it.
Next,
so a lot of times in carburetors, like the guy my friend at the dyno shop, you get Tinkeritis.
Right.
You start messing with them, pretty soon you ruin the carburetor.
Ah.
Start drilling holes in it and doing things that, if you're not. There's a lot of books on Quadrajets.
Okay.
Yeah, you get into hot rod books and stuff, there's a lot of magazines, articles about them. And usually the guy's article he wrote is his opinion again.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. These are my opinion.
Yeah.
And don't go home and start drilling holes in the carburetor.
And probably some of Ed's opinions have to do with racing, maybe circle track or roundy round, as he says. May not be for a daily driver.
That's right. Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
Have you ever modified a Quadrajet by cutting or bending a pin to make it operate as a 4-barrel full all the time, bypassing the vacuum secondary?
No, I don't think so. I thought that if I run the secondaries open, it's way too much air for the speed of the engine.
Gotcha.
The speed of the engine and how much air that goes in the carburetors. I think if you open those secondaries, that's a lot of air. The secondaries are almost twice as big as the carburetor.
Right.
Because the primers are so small. That's I would say the primaries are probably 1/4 of the volume of the carburetor.
Okay.
And the battery are 3/4. And you start opening that 3/4 and then the engine RPMs is not up. Well, you have a big bog.
Yeah.
Okay. And air fuel ratio is going to go wild.
Right.
I don't know. He can try if he wants to.
Yeah, but and you're maybe describing also, I remember the first time I learned.
I mean, we're talking on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on the motor.
Yeah.
How big a camshaft he's got, and how big camera and exhaust and all that stuff. Everything's all by itself. Don't be.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So.
And also, you're bringing up the reason why. I remember the first time I learned this, I thought it was counterintuitive that a 4-barrel carburetor could be more efficient for a street car than a 2-barrel sometimes.
Sometimes they are.
Yeah.
I love 4-barrel carburetors on some RV vehicles. Because the common sense, in Arizona here, we go to Flagstaff and we go up there a mile.
Yeah.
Sometime between here and Flagstaff, 150 miles, we went up a mile.
Of elevation.
Yeah. So we go up the hill, and our truck would go up the hill and take some half an hour to go up the hill.
Yeah.
At 15 miles an hour. The other guy gasses on a 4-barrel. He goes up the hill at 15 minutes at half the time, and the other guy's still going up the hill, and he gets to the top of the hill. The other guy's down the road 60 miles an hour, and he's 15 miles down the road. The other guy just got up the hill.
Yeah.
So which car is going to burn more gas in 15 minutes or half an hour?
Oh, good way to look at it.
Absolutely. Well, they're both running wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So we like a little horsepower going up the hill. Absolutely.
That makes sense.
And to get the motor warmed up, going up the hill again, we have some things we do. As going up the hill again, the more you pull that thing, the slower it goes, the motor gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And pretty soon, the more hotter the motor gets, the less horsepower it puts out, and the slower you go.
You got everything working against you at that point.
Absolutely everything. And then the guy pulls his motorhome over, and the hoses are about this big around, and they all fly off, and now he's no water at all. So the best thing you can do is go up the hill, over the hill down the other side, put it in neutral, and let it coast down the next hill, and the temperature gauge go back down to nothing.
Yeah.
And it keeps on going. You better do that.
You can learn a lot just trying to get a motorhome up a hill.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a motorhome up there. And we'll go back to the the injectors, water injectors.
No.
Go back into there, squirt a little water in the carburetor going up the hill, and if you don't like water, put a little alcohol in it again, back to the alcohol.
Yeah.
Put a little alcohol in the water injectors and squirt in the air cleaner. Up the hill you go, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's all good stuff. A little time and
a
little common sense there. But
yeah.
It might cost you a couple bucks too, but you'll be all right.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so here's a good one. Can you explain the process for tuning dual carburetors? Sometimes in a lot of old vintage cars, they had 2 carburetor setups, different kinds. How do you go about tuning it when there's 2 to work with?
Usually it only runs on one 2-barrel.
Okay.
They don't run on all of them at all.
Okay.
The second carburetor, the rear carburetor, usually runs on one half of that carburetor. So you run on a 2-barrel, you do all your tuning on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you start with one carburetor.
Yes.
And you tune that one just perfect?
That's your adjustments. Okay. All in that one. The front carburetor is basically almost completely shut off. And some of the factory carburetors did have adjustments on them. You can adjust the front one a little bit, just carefully, but it has very little time. Basically, 90% of the engine running on the 2-barrel, the front half of the rear carburetor.
Okay.
For the factory. And 90% of it is run on that carburetor, not the front carburetor at all.
Okay.
It's all progressive linkage.
Yeah.
And you accelerate, you go into the front half of the carburetor, the front one, and the next one is all of them open. If you want a full wide open throttle.
Okay. So
that's fairly easy.
But let me just ask a follow-up then. He's asking about, you've got 2 carburetors to tune. So when you're, say, mid-throttle, how do you make sure that both carburetors are set up right?
Probably mid-throttle. The secondaries you wouldn't get in the secondaries for probably over 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You still run that 2-barrel.
But now you got 2 carburetors.
That's what I'm saying. But the front one it's progressive. It don't even work till you're cruising down the road at 50, 60 miles an hour.
Okay. Okay. So when it does come time where that progressive linkage
Yeah,
kicks in the second carburetor.
that's right.
Okay, so how do you tune that carburetor for that moment when that happens?
That's just the jetting. That's all. There's no tune to it.
Oh, okay.
There's no adjustments. There's no adjustments at
So
all.
it's
You
just-
can't adjust the engine. Like you say, the adjustments, idle screws on a carburetor is only 800 RPMs or less.
Okay.
And you're way past that.
So you just make sure your jetting is the same on both?
Yes. Whatever jetting is supposed to be, yes.
Okay.
Air fuel ratio goes back to same way, 8:14:1. You shouldn't be changing the jets on those carburetors at all if they're a matched pair of carburetors for that motor.
Okay. All right.
Unless you were in Denver or somewhere, or in LA,
Yeah.
or somewhere with a high humidity.
Okay.
You get like a little adjustment for them.
Yeah.
But don't get into Tinkeritis and start messing with them. That's what the factory carburetors now.
Uh-huh.
And usually if you put two Edelrock carburetors on, it's the same thing. Almost close the front one completely off
Okay.
as far as the adjustments and just on the rear. Yeah. I love 2.4 barrels.
Yeah. You like that setup?
I like that setup, yeah.
Well, now we're going to change direction a little bit here, and we're going to slide over into questions about cooling systems. You talked about the motorhome getting hot, going up the hill. Oh, you know what? I have a feeling a bunch of these questions are about that whole thing about the bypass on that Ford 302.
Oh, yeah, okay.
A lot of questions came up.
Oh, I suppose. I stirred the pudding up that time.
You sure
Yeah,
did.
stirred the pot. Okay.
I have a feeling, yeah, there's going to be a few things. Can you clarify if that cooling bypass modification is safe and advisable? Is it only for racing applications, giving the debate over the multiple purposes and the potential risks? And what do you do with the thermostat compared to that bypass? Is that just a racing thing or just an Arizona thing, or what do you think?
I would do it all the time.
Okay.
The only thing that bypass for is to get the motor warm. Especially the main part of that thing that we found out is the thing with the Cadillac doing so much. It's almost a 1-inch hose, 1-inch hole in that thing to warms the heater up.
Okay.
So when the woman backed her limousine out of the garage, the heater was already working. Had nothing to do with the flow of the engine
Okay.
and do anything else. The thermostat controls the heat of the engine.
Yeah.
And I know some people like to run a thermostat because they want the motor to get hot up to 180 or something.
Right.
It's more efficient at 180 than it is 160 by a long ways. Like we say, the maximum horsepower you get out of usually a gasoline engine or something, horsepower is about 200.
Okay.
But how to control that exactly 200 is a big trouble.
Yeah.
So it's just like some of the new Corvettes. And then we get into this, that's the older cars now.
Right.
You get in the newer cars with the emissions.
Yeah.
If they don't run 200, they won't pass emissions. So sad. That bypass then.
Yeah.
And some people think that that's freezing up or they get air bubbles in the engine.
Right.
Or blocking the air or something. But it'll get by there.
Okay.
And even Chevy V8s and the water pump, the one water pump gasket, has got a hole in it, about a 1/4-inch hole. Not a 1/2-inch hole like Ford in that bypass tube.
Yeah.
And not like a 3/4-inch hole in a Ford M motor, 351M.
Yeah.
It's got a hole. We always plug that one.
Yeah.
Every time we rebuild a motor, we don't tell the customer, we plug it.
Right.
And then the Cadillac up to 3/4-inch hole. But Ford, Chevrolet gets a hole, gets through with a 1/4-inch hole.
Ah.
So why would you want anything bigger? Even our race cars and a Chevrolet, we plug that hole. We tap it and plug it. I've never seen any reason why I need to get air out of the motor.
Yeah. So you haven't had problems with cavitation?
And just like sometimes we see some videos on these people saying you need your radiator flush. Oh, it's been 3 years. You go and have to flush the radiator, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to get all the air out of your motor because that's part of the service for maybe $100 or something.
Yeah.
Put some antifreeze in it, whatever. I hope that answers questions, and I don't think I don't see any reason to have a bypass and a motor with a pressure system.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a little bit of a different sideways angle. This is a comparison thing. Do you know, does the bypass on the 302, is that similar to what happens on the Ford FE engines? What's that, starting in 54 or whatever,
Yeah,
those FE
yeah.
motors? Did they have a bypass that did a similar thing?
Yeah, same thing, yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to get in an argument about somebody that physics and things like this about pressure in the engine and things like that. We know that the higher pressure, the more, of course, we shouldn't get into that. Well, run hotter or when it boils.
Right, the boiling point raises with higher pressure.
Yeah, and fans and things like this.
Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a follow-up to the last question. Besides the 302 or those Windsor engines and the Y blocks, what about stuff like the Ford 460, the FE, Oldsmobile V8s? Some of them have bypasses. Do you have the same mindset on all of them?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, we live in Arizona.
Some of those engines, never overheat.
Yeah.
You don't have an engine overheating problem.
Okay.
It depends on, if you start putting a radiator in it, air conditioner and all stuff like this, then you raise the temperature. It depends on the fan shroud. You can control the heat.
Yeah.
And then the fan blades itself. How big the fan blades. We used to have those stainless steel fan blades that was all flexible. And they blow a lot of air.
Yeah.
And some of the cars depends on how much ventilation you got in the radiator. I know for a while some Buicks, I don't know what year the Buicks were. That was a strange problem. The way the grill was made, they all overheated. Maybe I don't know what year that was. I'd have to go back and dig in some things or some literature about that, some factory bulletins.
Really?
They made the way the grill was, the air didn't go through the radiator.
That's crazy.
Brand new car.
Yeah.
And so they had to come out and change something. I think they put some air ducts underneath it.
Okay.
Where it scoops a little bit more air and stuff in it.
Yeah. Huh.
But there's a lot of things that control the temperature of the engine. Compression ratio, and of course, the advance of the timing and how rich the carburetor is and how the exhaust is plugged up. The catalytic converter gets plugged up and overheats the motor.
So many things.
So many things. And it's just not one thing. It's not a bypass, so it's causing a problem.
Right. Right.
Whether you have a big one or a little one.
Okay, we're shifting over to camshafts and valve train questions here now. Do you agree that a reground camshaft, like one that's maybe been reworked multiple times by Delta Cam, let's say, does that offer superior seasoning and performance compared to a new camshaft?
I can't think that somebody's going to his word in it. The reground camshaft has been reground several times.
What's left of it, right?
Well, there's nothing left of the thing in the first place. Usually, we're lucky to regrind a camshaft one time.
Okay.
Other than that, it's around past the center.
Yeah. Yeah, you only got so much you can do.
Yeah, center, since the core, the camshaft core, you can only go so far.
Right, right.
And then you start changing the camshafts. And again, I do not have a camshaft regrind machine. I've never reground a camshaft, and I've talked to a lot of people that have. The guy that actually ground the camshafts and runs the business, I've talked to them, quite a few of them, and different things and their opinions. And of course, that's where I learned from.
Sure.
Because I'm not a camshaft grinder.
Yeah.
And some of these things, some of the guys argue a little bit about camshaft degrees and all kinds of things, and that's okay. we're not going to argue. Regrind the camshaft, you can probably regrind it one time.
Okay.
And performance camshafts, now we have some with a core support. The center core is so small. I have some over here on the shelf that instead of having maybe a 3/4 inch base
circle, yeah,
it's down to by size of a nickel.
Huh.
And you can grind that. It has a lot of meat on it. You can grind that camshaft several times.
Okay.
It's the same camshaft. It's going to flex from one end to the other.
Mm-hmm.
The smaller the core, the more the camshaft is going to flex.
Yeah.
You start putting big valve springs on it and lifters on it, stuff like this. I don't know exactly how much they'll flex from the front of the cam to the back of the cam.
But yeah, so there's at some point you're asking too much of it.
Yeah, there's a happy frame in there.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I think the question was if you lose your camshaft ability for hardening and stuff,
seasoning, yeah,
seasoning stuff like this, it'll all be the same.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's just a cast material. It's not a steel.
Right.
The new camshafts are steel.
I see. Okay.
They're nice and shiny, but yeah.
Is there a risk of grinding through a hardened surface on a camshaft into softer steel during an aggressive regrind?
If you were going to grind, again, I'm not a camshaft grinder, so I don't know.
Okay.
I think that would probably be regrinding. I'd have to talk to somebody. I don't see any reground used camshafts of a roller cam came out of an LS motor.
Okay.
I haven't seen those. There's a used LS motor steel camshaft
Okay.
with rollers that's been reground. I haven't seen that. Maybe they do have reground. I don't know. I think that I have a friend, Texas or New Mexico, that grinds camshafts, and one of these days I'll ask him.
Okay. Yeah.
If he's even ground if he can grind a late model LS cam.
Yeah.
I don't know if they can or not.
Yeah. And there's even the question of, do they harden the surface of those things after they grind them?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
There may be some technology that's more recent that we're not.
Yeah, that's right. More than I have been.
Yeah, that's fair. Do you have to break in? This is a good question. Do you have to break in a roller camshaft the same as a flat tap?
We do a little bit.
Okay.
We just started a 351 Windsor this morning. I think you videoed some of it.
Yeah.
It's got a roller camshaft in it. And we don't let it idle because we want to splash oil.
Okay.
We want to splash from one of the other. We want the whole inside of that motor being splashed with oil. That would be the pistons, the rings, the cylinder walls and valves and valve guides and lifters and everything. We want it to be completely splashed with oil. So we would not let it idle.
Well, why don't you?
We wouldn't go 2,000,
okay.
but we'd run it. I think this morning we ran that one about 1,200.
Okay.
For quite a while until it warmed up, and
yeah,
we went on a couple. Then we do it a couple times before we actually put the motor in service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you take just a second? Can you explain why idling an engine is not as good for it, especially in break-in, of course.
Of course.
But just explain, why is it that oiling and all that is better at a higher speed? Because it sounds like idling is the nicest thing you could do.
If you idle something real slow, you get hot. And that's that's not to say, it's the rod bearings, main bearings, cam bearings, timing chain, all the gears, things in front. Not necessarily, we're talking about lifters.
What about the oiling part of it?
Oil part of it, yeah, I was to say, the oil part of it, the oil pump, everything else, we want to splash oil. Oil everywhere, like a wash machine.
So would it be fair to say that at idle, there's just barely enough oil?
That's right.
And then at higher RPM, you're getting an abundance?
That's exactly right. Yes, okay. Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, it may not squirt some little hole. Instead of squirting it out with high pressure, maybe a little hole in the front of the oil galley where it oils the timing chain.
Yeah.
That little pressure, maybe just drip out of there or something.
Yeah.
Because the oil's that point. We want to squirt out oil right now.
Right. But you don't want to go 6,000 RPM.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So there's again a happy medium for things.
Happy medium. On a roller motor, maybe 1,000 RPMs.
Yeah. For
several minutes. Especially if you got water in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's the perfect run in for a camshaft?
Again, I don't agree with running one Cessna's 2,000 RPMs. You see something like 2,000 RPMs for 5 minutes or something like that. That's insane.
Okay.
And it's going to splice the same way. There's only going to pump so much oil between the rod bearing clearances, the main bearing clearances, and the clearances that actually spray the oil.
Okay.
And the lifters and things like this. So clearances are all there. It's going to spray just as much oil at 1,000 RPMs as it going to be at 4,000.
Okay.
And as soon as you break it in a few minutes, a few minutes, we would probably have an engine on the engine stand, put water in it and everything. We'd fire it up with no water in it. That's our procedure. Fire it up just to make sure the timing's okay, and shut it up and shut it. So we'll actually start and shut off. I mean, a second, just as long as it starts up. Then we're ready to put the water in it, check the oil again, check everything okay. Fire it up, make sure we run it about 1,000 RPMs, maybe 1,200. Depends on what the carburetor's set at, because we'll set the idle up on the carburetor.
Yeah.
Don't let it idle. And then, so at that, just our brand new carburetor, we always back the choke off electrically, the screws. We don't want to mess with the choke being rich or lean.
Right.
And the adjustment screws, we're talking about an Edelrock carburetor. I would give them a turnout. Screws. And we're ready to start it up then. Got water in it, got full of oil in it, fire it up and run it by 1,200 RPMs. Hold it up there. Make sure it's not leaking somewhere. We look at it with the flashlight and visually see that the front seal's not leaking, the water's not leaking, the plug's not leaking. It's all okay.
Yep.
No leaks or anything else.
Yep.
And we sit there and run it with the temperature. We had a fan on it. Check the oil pressure instantly. Make sure it's got oil pressure.
Yep.
80 pounds or something. And we'd run it for maybe until it warms up, turn the fan on. Maybe we might set it up on fast idle, or we sit there and run at 1200, 1300 until we're make sure it's okay. We would feel the valve covers with our hands to make sure the rocket arms are not hitting the valve covers. There's a little vibration there. Make sure it runs smooth, no vibration.
Then you're good to go.
We're ready to go. After it warms up, we might shut it off and make sure everything, and come back 15, 20 minutes later, start it up again, do the same thing. That time, then we'll lower the carburetor back down to idle speed, maybe 600 or 700, and you can finally adjust the carburetor and set the timing to give it the timing light, 10 degrees normally, with the vacuum unhooked off the carburetor.
Okay.
Static timing, just sit there, shut it off, starts up again. We're done.
Good to go.
Yeah, we're good to go, yeah.
Okay.
And we may, if we got time, depends on what time during the day, next morning we may start it again.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Take it off the stand then, put the crate and ship it.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though we do the same thing in the car, but we don't do cars anymore. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything different? We use the small block Chevy as an example. Is that pretty similar?
All of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, all of them were start.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thank you for taking the time to answer everybody's questions again.
Very good.
Awesome. And thank you for, again, staying with us, watching our videos. And we're enjoying it, and we're going to try to keep doing more. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Again, I like the word enjoy.
Enjoy.
We may come up with something.
Yeah, that's right.
We got something in the back of our head here. You might like it.
That's right. So please enjoy these videos, and we enjoy doing them with you. So here we go.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Ed.